Senhores,
Gentlemen,
queridas irmãs,
dear sisters,
queridos irmãos
dear
espíritas,
Spiritist brothers,
caras amigas,
dear
caros
friends
amigos, que nos acompanham
who
pela
follow
Web
us
TV,
through Web TV
Mansão
Mansão do Caminho,
nossos votos
our
de
most
muita
sincere
paz.
wishes for peace.
Estamos na expectativa
We are looking forward
da realização do nosso
to our
seminário
seminar
no dia 7
on
de
September
setembro,
7th,
quando nossa casa
when our house
completa 75
celebrates
anos.
75 years of
E
existence.
através da tela da memória,
And through the screen
eu
of
sigo
memory,
repassando
I've been
esse
reflecting
dado do
upon
início
the beginning
dos nossos estudos
of our
espíritas
Spiritist
há
studies
7 décadas
7.5 decades ago,
quando a ignorância
when ignorance
a respeito do espiritismo
about Spiritism
chegava ao
would come to the level
de verdadeira
of true
perturbação.
disturbance.
Ainda me recordo
I still recall
que a coragem de alguém
that the
dizer
courage of some
espírita
to call themselves Spiritists
significava perder
meant
relacionamentos
losing
afetivos,
relationships, affections,
amigos,
friends,
posição social,
social
lugar
positions,
de trabalho,
workplace,
etc.
etc.
Eu era muito jovem.
I was very young then
Quando começamos
when we started
essas
these
atividades
spiritual
espirituais,
activities.
e como era o
And
resultado de
because
fenômeno
it was the
mediúnico,
result of a mediumistic
qual
phenomenon
não nos podíamos
from which we
libertar,
couldn't ignore,
fomos
we
à
went
então
then
União
to the
Espírita
Spiritist
Baiana,
Union of
hoje
Bahia,
Federação Espírita do Estado da Bahia,
today the Spiritist
para
Federation
escutar
of the state of Bahia,
jovem orador
to listen to a young
que
speaker
visitava as cidades,
who was visiting
levando
the
a
cities,
noção exata de
conveying
que era
the exact
espiritismo.
notion of what Spiritism
Havia
was
no
about.
Brasil um
There
órgão
was
de
in Brazil
imprensa
a press
muito
agency
considerado,
highly
que tinha sua
respected,
sede no Rio de Janeiro,
whose base was located in Rio de Janeiro.
A Noite Ilustrada.
It was called
E dos
the
seus
Illustrated
funcionários
Night,
trabalhava
and one of their
para
employees
conseguir sócios
prospected for
para
new
essa
members
empresa
for
cultural
this
e
culture and art
artística.
company.
Durante o dia,
During the
ele
day,
se dedicava a fazer a
he would
corretagem,
dedicate himself to
a
these tasks.
encontrar anunciadores no
Then he
Brasil
found clients in
para esse
Brazil
órgão de
for
muito
this
efeito
agency of
cultural
strong cultural
da cidade do
effect
Rio de
in Rio de Janeiro.
Mas às noites,
But at night,
ele se dedicava
he occupied
a
himself
divulgar o espiritismo.
disseminating the
E
Spiritism.
naquele domingo,
And
dia
on
4
that
de
Sunday,
setembro,
September
ele
4th,
deveria proferir uma
he should
conferência
deliver a
na
lecture
União Espírita Baiana,
at the Spiritist
na sua
Union of
atividade
Bahia
às 10 da manhã.
on his activity
Como eu
at 10 a.m.
frequentava vez que outra
As I attended
a
once in a
União
while
Espírita Baiana,
the Spiritist Union
na
at that
época,
time,
Salvador, talvez
Salvador
tivesse
may had 4 or 5 Spiritist centers
de portas
opened
abertas
to the
ao
public.
público. O maior número
Most of
eram
them
grupos familiares.
were family groups.
Eu fui escutá-lo.
I went there to see
Fiquei
him
deslumbrado.
and got
Eu contava
blown away.
18 anos,
I was about
e aquele
18 years
orador
old, and that
havia
speaker
penetrado no âmago
had
da minha
penetrated the
alma.
core of
Eu
my soul.
nunca
I had
houvera
never
ouvido
listened
orador
to a
espírita.
Spiritist speaker before.
Aqueles que proferiam as
Those who gave
conferências,
lectures then
então, seguiam
followed
a tradição.
the tradition.
Antes da palestra,
Before the lecture,
pegava ali calhamaço de
took
papel
a stack
e lia
of papers
de uma forma monótona,
and read them
desagradável,
in such a
que a
boring,
maioria
unpleasant
cochilava
way
durante uma hora.
that most of the
Inclusive,
audience
eu.
snoozed for an hour,
Porque
including myself,
dizia, mas não
because
dizia
they
nada.
spoke but
E eu
didn't
ia
say
porque eu
anything.
ia,
And I went
mas não
there
conseguia
because everybody
penetrar
did,
no âmago.
but I didn't seem to get the
E aquele
gist of
rapaz,
it.
que na época
And
tinha
that young
31
man,
anos,
who back then was
falou
about
sobre
31
Cristo
years old,
Jesus.
talked
Eu
about
pensei
Jesus
que
Christ.
espiritismo
I
nada
thought
tinha a
Spiritism
ver
had nothing to
com
do with
cristianismo.
Christianism,
Mas o tema que ele havia
but the
escolhido
theme he had
foi muito
chosen
peculiar.
was very unique.
O encontro de Jesus
The moment
com a mulher
Jesus
samaritana.
meets the Samaritan
É aquela
woman.
parte em que ele estava
It's
sentado
that
no
part
poço
when
de
he was
Jacó,
sitting by the Jacob's well in Samaria,
região entre
a region
Galileia
between
e a
Galilee
Judeia.
and Judea.
Samaria odiada
Samaria was
todos os
hated
demais judeus,
by all the other Jews
porque a Samaria
because Samaria
era considerada
was
uma
considered
raça impura,
an impure race,
desde quando
since
os
when the
assírios,
Assyrian,
conquistando Jerusalém,
conquering Jerusalem,
saíram da capital
left the
e
capital
avançaram tanto para o norte,
and advanced both
a
to the
Galileia,
north,
como
Galilee,
para o sul,
and to the
a fim
south,
de alcançarem,
in order
mar.
to reach the sea.
E tiveram grande rechaço.
And they suffered a
em
great
Jerusalém.
rejection in Jerusalem.
Então,
So
eles recuaram
they
a
retreated
esta região neutra.
to this neutral region.
E aí
And then
tiveram batalhas,
they had battles,
conquistaram a região dos
conquered
samaritanos
the Samaritan's
e
region,
naturalmente
and naturally
levaram as pessoas
took the healthy
saudáveis
people
para a
to
Babilônia.
Babylon.
E aqueles que ficaram
And those who remained
tiveram de sofrer o
had
efeito
to
da
suffer the effects of the
miscigenação racial.
miscegenation.
E os judeus
And the Jews
perdoavam
didn't forgive
aqueles que houvessem
those
traído
who
a
had
raça
betrayed the race
e
and naturally
conspurcado o
defiled
próprio sangue.
their own blood.
Então os judeus isolaram os
Then
samaritanos.
the Jews isolated the Samaritans. And that's why,
Nas referências do Evangelho
in the
sobre os
references to
samaritanos,
Samaritans in the
eles são
Gospel,
sempre vistos
they are always
como segunda
pictured
classe
as a
do povo.
lower class of
E
the
essa
people.
divergência era tão
And this
grave
divergence was so
que os
grave
judeus
that the Jews
proibiram aos samaritanos
forbid the
de
Samaritans
visitar o templo
from
de
visiting
Salomão.
Solomon
O
Temple.
templo de Salomão
The Solomon
ficava
Temple
no
was
coração de Jerusalém,
in the heart of
em uma
Jerusalem,
montanha
on a mountain
que bordeja
which
um dos
stretches
córregos mais
along
famosos
one of the most
da
famous
capital de
streams of Israel.
Naquela oportunidade,
In that opportunity,
como era natural,
naturally,
estando ali,
being there,
aquela raça
that
diferente,
different race,
o biótipo humano
the human biotype,
samaritano,
Samaritan,
samareu,
was
era
very
bem diverso
different
do tipo israelita.
from the Israeli type.
E desta forma,
And this way,
eles ficaram sitiados
they were
por
besieged
inimigos
by
da sua
enemies
raça
of their
e por
race
inimigos que
and by
invadiam
enemies
seu
that
território.
invaded their territory.
Mas mantiveram seu
But they
contato
kept
com Deus.
their faith in
Na
God.
região da Samaria,
In the region of
há
Samaria,
uma cordilheira.
there is a
E
mountain
nessa
range,
cordilheira,
and there
ergueram templo
a temple to God was built.
já que não
Once
podiam visitar
they couldn't visit
o sagrado
the
templo
sacred temple
que Salomão reformou
that Solomon had
e
remodeled,
Herodes, o
and
Grande,
Herodes the
embelezou
Great
para
refurbished
agradar os
to
judeus.
please the Jews.
Jesus, sendo judeu,
Jesus, being a Jew,
deveria manter aquele mesmo
should
preconceito
keep
contra os samaritanos.
that same prejudice against the
Mas ele
Samaritans.
viera para
But he
unir
came to
o que
unite
estava separado,
what was separate,
para oferecer uma receita de
to
paz
offer
à
a
humanidade.
recipe for
Não
peace
veio
to
pregar uma
humanity.
religião a
He
mais,
didn't come to
veio
preach
dizer
one more religion.
que sim,
He came to
Deus
say that,
é único.
yes, God is one.
ideia que os judeus
Idea that the Jews
foram o único
were the
povo
only people
a declarar
to declare
publicamente
publicly
o monoteísmo.
the monotheism.
Era, portanto,
Israel was
país
therefore
semelhante ao
a country
oásis
like an
no
oasis
deserto politeísta.
in the polytheistic desert.
Havia oásis
There was a
monoteísta,
monotheistic
uma
oasis
ilha
or
de
an island
polytheismo
of monotheism
em que Deus
where
único,
God,
soberano, governava
holy and sovereign,
homens e nações.
ruled man and
E
nations.
toda vez que Jesus
And
se
every
referia
time
aos
Jesus
samaritanos,
referred
os
to the
judeus
Samaritans,
reprochavam
the
no.
Jews
E
disapproved.
ele disse, mas eu venho
And he said,
não somente para
but I
estas
come not
ovelhas.
only for these sheep,
Eu tenho outras
I have
ovelhas
other sheep
que não são
that
deste
are not
rebanho.
from this flock.
Isto é, ele veio
That
para
is,
todas as criaturas.
He came for all
Não
creatures,
somente aquelas que tinham crença,
not only
porque
for
não tinham
those
crença.
who had a
O
belief,
seu objetivo
but for those
não
who
era
didn't.
criar uma
His
doutrina
objective
religiosa
was
a
not
mais.
to create one more religious
Era
doctrine.
educar,
It was to educate, promote
dignidade do
the
ser humano.
dignity of the human
era
being,
fazer que ao invés de mendigos
so that instead of beggars,
houvesse
there could be employees. It's one of the most elevated objectives of the international socialism. Not having dependent, but making independent people. Instead of creating poverty, free from it through dignifying work. All those who can work don't need to be kept neither by the state nor by the rest, because they are not a burden on the social organism. They are the ones who need help, support, motivation, but also who can have an independent life within their socioeconomic standards. So that was Jesus' proposal. And that's why he said ipsis verbi. One commandment I shall give you, that you love one another. So before this proposal that goes beyond the 10 Commandments, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself, he reconnected the creature to the divinity through love that must live among us, human creatures. So that was Jesus' proposal. And he sat there by the well, which was the only one. It still exists, and it was made by a father of the race. When a woman came to draw some water, and the dialogue that follows is very beautiful, because the woman was shocked to see a Jew in their territory. And even more when he asks for water. Woman, will you give me a drink? And she replies, you are Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for water? He then smiles and says, but you have the water you'll soon be back for. I, however, have the water that will quench your thirst for all eternity. So give me, sir. But you don't have the bucket and the rope to draw it. What is the water that you have? And he answers smoothly, the one that makes the hatred and the distances among the creatures disappear, so that the pain of one becomes the solidarity of another, and the need of one remains above his or her socioeconomic and moral positions. She then looked at him and said, how do you know that? I know that the Jews wait for a prophet. Then he stops and says, I am him, the Christ. It's very interesting. He doesn't say Jesus, the Christ of God. It's like saying that between God and the human creatures, there is an archetype. There is an intermediary called Christ, Buddha, a reference to perfection, a transcendent being to whom we can turn anytime because he is between God and us. Jesus is the Son of God who's born, who gives us the message of the Christ and guides us sweet and tenderly to God. They talk. It's very easy to find in the Gospel of John. She is bedazzled and says, but you are the Christ of God. Yes, I am. Because Jesus was God's medium. For God to get in touch with us, it's necessary a paranormal induction from an energy, from a vibration. I appeal to God. I am hungry, help me. and somebody comes to help me in the name of God, and he uses the help of somebody else to help me. I'm in the dark, I need guidance, and somebody offers himself to turn on the light of knowledge to free me from stupidity and ignorance. This way, that 31-year-old youth was carrying on his approach, because until then I was Catholic and only knew the gospel from the Mass. I was the altar boy, and I knew the act of helping in the Mass in Latin, which wasn't absurd, because I knew and know until today all those Latin lines, but I don't know what they mean. So I had no idea what I was saying. For example, the priest would come in, turn, open his arms and say, Inter ad altare Dei. Something like, welcome to the home of God. It was John the 23rd who, in the Great Council, obliged the people to speak the national idiom. Why do I have to speak Latin, which is not my idiom? It's not the idiom of Jesus. Jesus spoke Aramaic. It was the dialect. The idiom was Hebrew, but as the people was constituted by 12 tribes, and each tribe spoke their own dialect, and also a little Hebrew, Jesus spoke a dialect that was the language of the people, and could certainly get by in Hebrew as well as Greek. That was very common. And a little bit of Latin too, because it was the language imposed by the Roman Empire that ruled over 80% of the world known. But that Latin, as it happens today, was called the popular Latin, the Latin of the soldiers, of the legions. It wasn't the Latin of the 7 hills of Rome, the Latin of Cicero, the extraordinary Latin of the philosophers, of the warriors of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, this warrior who considered himself divine, spoke Latin so well that besides having conquered the world as they knew it, also left some works in Latin, one of which is called The Four Ages. The other one is very famous, the crossing of the Rubicon. The Rubicon was the river that made the conquests difficult. And Caesar, in the triumvirate, when he and 2 others ruled Rome, crossed the river and bequeathed the humanity, one of the most extraordinary battle techniques. He was, therefore, a great culture pioneer. And also there was the Latin of the literature. So the Latin that is spoken until today in Rome is the popular Latin of the soldiers, the legions. So that young man described this meeting of Jesus and the pagan woman who didn't belong to her flock, showing that all of us have the right to the kingdom of heaven, to inner peace, the peace of the consciousness. It's no use to be in peace from the sociological point of view. Brazil is in peace, but there has never been so much murder as now. There has never been so much femicide, killing of women by men who are not men. They are rough drafts of individuals who apply for the dignity of civilization, but are deeply coward. To murder those who reject them, those who are tired of suffering, male chauvinism, or its different pathologies. Then he kills psychologically. He is killing himself. He is killing in him that he despises in others. It's the psychology of the individual. When we see in Brazil the high rate of crime against the homosexual, the bisexual, hatred. Even some of us applaud because we have a problem and we covered it up. So we kill in the other that we hate in ourselves. Hence the expression, to get out of the closet. It's locked. It's hidden. We are pretending not to have a conflict, but we are in conflict. Who isn't in some angles of the existence? Jesus breaks down all prejudice. The woman was arrested because she committed adultery. So what? Man doesn't as well? And he teaches us one of the most beautiful lessons I know from the little philosophy I've read. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. For me to punish the aggressor, I must not have his aggressiveness, because I would be a hypocrite. I come here, predicate, talk about it, and at home, I'm another person. I'm a tormented man, a person with a shattered ego. And Jesus' proposal is a generous self. I tolerate the person who commits a serious mistake, because I do the same, but not for that. It's because Paul the Apostle used to say, I do everything I don't want to, but can't do what I want to. He had courage to say that because he could already see himself as Paulo, without problems, like not having the need to feed himself, because we are too attached to the myth, because I'm a spiritist, because I am a medium. People ask me, do you eat meat? And I say, apart from the vegetables, I eat everything. The question is to survive. Oh, but to eat meat. I say, what's the matter? The problem is digestive, not moral. Hitler was vegetarian, and he was so cute. Stalin was vegetarian. Nonetheless, one of his decrees killed over 3 million people of hunger. So Jesus said, a man is not defiled by what enters in his mouth, but by what comes out of it. Then we must do like, even if someone says, you're ugly, we smile and think, he's worse than me, and keep smiling. We won't mind a silly word like that. Oh, but you are not the way I thought. Of course, I'm not like someone thinks. I am what I am. If someone wishes me well, accept me as I am, and not as you wish I were. Because it's so good to create diet plans for the others. Look, you cannot eat this, you cannot eat that. I am 95, even moldy plank have I eaten. When I was a child, I had asthma. Until I was 14, I had asthma. And my parents, my family, took care of everything, even the most strange superstitions. After my mother talked everybody out of superstition in our city fitted Santana, somebody came up with this new efficient method. They were talking about a vulture's burnt feather. So my family was very big. We were 13. My siblings were very intelligent. And 2 older ones went to the slaughterhouse to stone a vulture until its feather fell off. But the sick couldn't know about. If he did, the spell would lose its effect. And my mom kindly prepared that magic powder and gave me in some tea. So here stands somebody who survived asthma thanks to a vulture's burnt feather. Until today, I have this effect. I have respiratory issues, lung issues, from a previous reincarnation when I committed suicide. It has nothing to do with these superstitions. In the past, more precisely, on April 14th, 1792 in Paris, Note how fancy. To commit suicide in Paris. Oh, but guess how he died. Oh, he was run over by a car in Pau da Lima. No, it's not the same thing. So I threw myself into the Seine. I couldn't swim. It was still very cold, and I would have disincarnated. But it's so peculiar that I have always hated water. Never swam in the sea, even living by the sea. As we lived in the lower part of the city, our backyard was by the beach. I had never walked into the sea further than my knees. If I did, I would have drowned myself to death. Thanks to a psychological heritage, behind that archetype, that was drowned, I choke with a glass of water. I have to drink it carefully. Then I was touched by the Spiritism in that young man's lecture, talking about Jesus Christ. It was not about an important person from the Bible. It was about a philosopher teaching us how to live a healthy life. Why would anybody be blamed for being born in Samaria, to be so hated, as are the Jewish, or the Polish, the Chinese, the Japanese today? From our prejudice, the philosopher comes and says, all races are just effects of hereditary or environmental nature. But it's not the body that matters, it's the essence in it. And when he finished this conference, I totally agreed, because the voices that talked to me told me about these things. And as I was a very dedicated Catholic, there was often a clash between what I heard and what I did. I told our priest, extraordinary man, by the way, wise, generous. He found me a little mischievous, of course, but he was very patient. When people stood in a line to receive the wafer, I saw it adorned with lights, with some of them. With others, I didn't see anything. It was the unction of each one before the symbol of the Roman Church. At the end, I went to talk to the gentleman. He smiled and said, just like this, but you heard everything I said? I said yes. But what called my attention the most was not exactly what you said. It was the figure I saw with all those features that often got me confused about who was talking, you or him. He was taken aback and asked me if I could describe it. So I did naturally. I described it, and he said, you know, Divaldo, this is my spiritual guide. I've been a spiritist for 10 years. I am Baiano and live in Governador Valadares, in Minas Gerais. And I make these trips. Do you attend any spiritist centers? I said, yeah, once a while I come here to the Federation. And to this young man, I virtually owe God's mercy, because he put his hand on my shoulder and said, but you're so young. Have you read the Spiritist book? I said, no, I didn't know it existed. And he asked, is there a place we could talk? I didn't have a family in Salvador and lived with Nilson in a guest house for young men. And I said, you know, I could ask the owner of the house if he would allow a visitor for some hours. And I will give you an answer if you give me your hotel's phone number. And it was curious that talking to a couple of friends later on, I said, but he was impressed. But I also had no idea what mediumship was about. I just could see. And when people asked me, how do you see? I said, seeing. It shows and disappears. I see what I want, but also I see what I don't. Then the couple said, bring him to our place. We'll have some coffee. Today's Sunday. You can talk tonight. This coffee lasted till the next day, Monday morning. You know, because the subject was very short. And he said, Givaldo, you should open a Spiritist center with your friends. But then I said, but how do we do that? Well, you get together, say a prayer, ask for the divine protection, because wherever we call upon God through a prayer, He'll be present. Then I said, so can you help us? He said, I can. That Monday, he went to the Spiritist Union of Bahia and asked for the charter. In it, we created the center that he named Caminho da Redenção Spiritist Center, the path to redemption. And he said, it will be the path to your redemption and to whoever wishes for it. So we wrote the charter the following night, and it was done, but we didn't have a place for it. At this couple's place, there was a very beautiful mango tree. And on September 7th, at 10 o'clock, we invited those people we knew and created the Spiritist Center Caminho da Redenção, whose 75 years anniversary will be celebrated on the coming September 7th. But soon, we started to read. I read the Spirit's book once, twice, 10 times. I read until today. The Spirits went on guiding us, and they said, we have to help one another. Charity is essential in our lives, and we must dedicate ourselves to it with all our might. We started to understand Spiritism more and more, and the philosophical science of religious and ethical consequences. And we felt the need to improve our lives, because we are what we did yesterday. And through reincarnation, we are making up for the mistakes. To this man, José da Costa Freitas, we owe the institution we are today. Because on the following Sunday, we went to the Uruguay neighborhood. At that time, the city's garbage dump, where kids drowned themselves to death in the mud of the region. We would go around handing out candies to as many as we could find on the streets. This gesture and others gave birth to Mansão do Caminho, the Mansion of the Way, to the house of the children, socially orphans, without their parents, caused by death or by neglect. Our first child was found in a trash bin at our front door, a 3-floor building that we acquired on 124 Barão do Cotegipe Street. And from then on, we've been dedicating ourselves to educate orphans. Initially, as an orphanage, it was the idea at that time. Later on, the Spirits suggested that we started in Latin America, the then called replacement homes. Instead of orphanage, which is a strong word, the home for those who didn't have one. Later, an open institution. We moved here to this 80,000 square meter area and started to build 15 homes where people who worked as tias, aunts, educated the children. And you can imagine, there were children coming from everywhere. Even from Rio de Janeiro, we took in 5 brothers. And we have never had any concerns about the circumstances in which these children were found. But for ethical purposes, all of them were being told about their origins, the circumstances as they grew up. I had 3 registered as sons. Nilsson had 3 as well, because they were the most painful cases. And we created a history together, a family, to place them in life, so they are not the orphan that pitiful outcast being. No, a citizen. So we make citizens from domestic services to university students who come from our arms here in Pau da Lima. But immediately we remember those who were in extreme poverty, and we created a group of people to help the starving. Today we have 500 families enrolled in the program. But what kind of program? We can help an 80-year-old lady who looks after her grandchildren who were abandoned by her children who ran away. So we have, of those families, over 10,000 who were assisted by Alta de Souza's aid convoy. But the number of people in need here was so high that we invited a friend from the army, who I believed to be a doctor, to help us with the assistance. Then we created an outpatient clinic, which has already seen over 500,000 families in this period. And soon after, we created our nursery. When newborns were left in our hall, at the door, on the street, we were notified and went to pick them up. So today we have 13 institutions which work inside our home, as if they were 13 Spiritist institutions. We created a facility for natural childbirth, free of charge. Up to today, we have assisted an expressive number of cases. And it's curious, I rarely go out. Sometimes I go to a government department or something, and then I hear, oh, my son was born there. So we had a picture taken of all those who were born here at the mansion. And like that, we went on trying to help with the needs. We created a beautiful nursery. Our nursery is so beautiful that whoever comes in will never come out, because they will incarnate as a child and will run back to the nursery. When the TV show called Fantástico visited us, the reporter, materialist, told me, you know, we are not Spiritists. We don't believe in Spiritism. I said, well, very well. What's the problem? If you make a report against, then you are not a reliable man. And I hope that the company that sends you will have a tiny bit of dignity to make a report, an interview. One thing is what you will say, and another is what we will say. Because if you lie, we will make a truthful one and have it aired as well, even if we need to sell everything to disprove the slander. He didn't even get to the middle of his argument and said, you know, Divaldo, if I'm not careful, I will end up becoming a Spiritist myself. I said, no, it will be good for you, because Spiritism has been living quite well without you so far. So it's not Spiritism that needs us. We, in our problems, look for solution. And Spiritism is one of them. To the ones who have eyes to see, we became good friends. He did some statistics on the number of children who have gone through our assistance. 130,000 children, because our area comprises 400,000 inhabitants in this region. So we kept multiplying, and we had great achievements. Some days ago, when there was the scholastic assessment test, Our high school presented its students, and considering our possibilities and those of the private schools in Salvador, paid, because everything with no exception is for free here. No exception, it's free. And we don't accept differently. Even people sometimes unintentionally come to visit and give money. I say, no. Thank you very much. Another time you can help. Because we don't want to make a living out of Spiritism, but we want to live by Spiritism. We all have our income. I have my retirement. Our president, all of us, to give. Hence, our celebration with the seminar, focusing depression and the anxiety stress. And I will be present, Dr. André Luiz Peixinho, Spiritist, another remarkable Spiritist, Dr. Machado, psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry at the University of Pernambuco, very young, 31 years old, who will be with us. My part will be a trip, a therapeutic trip. Instead of talking about theory that we are fed up with, we will have a transcendental experience, a journey in a search for our origins, the therapy of self-discovery, the therapy that is popular nowadays. What are you? Before any attempt, even in the problematic of the organic health, try to look over your emotional life to find the root causes of your psychological condition. So on the 7th, we will be working hard. And before coming here, while I was autographing, I was thinking about this extraordinary therapeutics. We will have a meeting with our spiritual guide, face to face. And he better come. Otherwise, we'll go pick him up, and he will have to come. He's already sent a telegram telling us that if he is feeling well, he'll come. I said, no, send a WhatsApp message when you are on your way. Then it's more elegant. Hence our effort to invite the ones interested. He or she will contribute with 85 reais. We are advertising through a company on the internet. And from next Tuesday on, we will start handing out the invitations ourselves. And I would like then to finish with a message of gratitude to José da Costa Freitas, who has already disincarnated. My friends, it's so curious. I was not going to talk about this subject, but as I was walking up the stairs, he showed himself to me and said, "Hello, Divaldo." He was rather carioca with his peculiar ways, quite different to the better. Hello, Divaldo. I think, I'm going to talk about Costa Freitas. The seeds he left here on earth, thousands of institutions. Now he is in the hereafter, and I think he must be a supervisor to show us that the good we do is good for us. The fact I was going to narrate is one of those historical facts of the popular art. The city of Milan, around the 16th century, was at its peak. But among the many problems it had, the city was facing one of those problems regarding its very constitution because of the waters. And one thinker who had created outstanding masterpieces and who was working now on the designing of a submarine, 16th century, and of an airplane, offered himself to draw for the city of Milan the renowned Milanese canals, which until today give this beautiful industrial city its extraordinary appearance. Leonardo da Vinci was among the geniuses of Renaissance. Literature, poetry, architecture, statuary were at their peak. And especially in Milan, one work would stand out, the museum started by Leonardo da Vinci, which still exists there and is open to every visitor. When a religious order called Santa Maria della Grazie hired Leonardo to paint the mural in its immense dining room, the mural was painted on fresh plaster according to the practice at that time. Mortar was applied to the wall first, then a layer of lime plaster, another layer of fresco, and as the plaster dried out, the artist used his brush and the plaster absorbed the paint, and it was as if all that layer was painted. So Leonardo started his studies. First, how the table would be placed so nobody would have their backs to the viewer. Genius. At the table, except for the princes, some have their backs turned, and he opted for the table one-sided. And the details on the table are so impressive that we can see the side of the tablecloth that was ironed to be folded. In the center of the table, since they were 13, the picture of Jesus. And he began to think, the most devoted disciple was the youngest, John Evangelist. And he was sweet and friend of Jesus's. So he was called the beloved disciple. Jesus loved him in such a special way that said, this one won't die like the others. All of them were murdered, except Judas, who committed suicide. But he didn't. He died of old age, somewhere between his 92 and 100 years of age, in the island of Patmos, where he went into exile. Then he pictured John at that supper, the Last Supper, the one that precedes Jesus washing the disciples' feet, saying goodbye, and giving us the legacy of immortality. He made many sketches conceiving how Matthew should be. Matthew was the chief of the taxation. He was a learned man, but the others were fishermen. One of them came from a very prosperous area of Judea called Kerioth. His name was Judas, Judas of Kerioth, the city. And he composed, but he began to imagine how Jesus was. How would be the face of that man who said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Naive and innocent about what evil is. That same Jesus who had the opportunity of looking at that woman who sold the body and said to her, "Love and do the good, because all your sins will be forgiven." What is to forgive is to not be seen. Why did she sell her body? Because that's what she was taught to do. When she was 13 in Jerusalem, she was sold to a brothel. She didn't have a father. She didn't have anybody. How can we blame her? Once a prostitute told me, "This is all I know." Because the body does it by atavism. I then noticed the peculiar word and realized that she had some culture. So I asked, "But what do you mean by atavism?" She said, "We are born doing as the animals. Nobody taught me. I learned. It just happened. It sprouted inside me." I said, "So, my dear, why are you still doing it?" "Because I don't know anything else to do. But it's easy. I will teach you how to sew so you can make a living with dignity." She said, "But I don't have a machine." I said, "I'll give you the machine." And we signed a contract to buy sewing machines, which at that time were sold in installments, and created a group of misleaded women, giving them the diploma and also the machine, bought in installments. And until today, we keep very discreet this way of helping the ones who don't know anything else to do, to learn to have dignity. We learn to love, we learn to hate. Nobody is born loving, nobody is born believing or not in God. Those are achievements of living together. So we teach. So Leonardo began to look for a man who was between 28 and 35 years old, with that same continence, manly and kind, gentle and dignified, tender and honored. How to define these hormones of manhood with a biotype that could talk to a misguided woman without starting her libido and say, "Love." But sir, who am I going to love? Your sisters, those who aren't loved, and their children, your children. Children, but I don't have children. Love the children who have no mothers, the mothers who have no children. It took a lot of courage from this man. We, human creatures, know how difficult it is to be gentle in the painful time, to be faithful in the moment of the mistake, and to stay when everybody else deserts. That's when he said, "Those who were faithful until the end." Because it's very easy to be faithful for a time, to get enthusiastic, to move from a palace to a shack, and vice versa. Difficult is to be faithful every day. Today, yesterday, tomorrow, afterwards, with the same joy in times of pain and suffering. It's not masochism, it's courage to face it, of hiding it, as wrote Chico Xavier. The Spiritists wipe their tears before helping the ones who are crying, because all of us have problems. Living is a biological phenomenon. Well living is an ethical phenomenon. Living well is a convenient phenomenon. I have money, I live well, but I am not well. And many times in the wealth, the conflicts are with me, the anxiety, the loneliness, the pain. So Jesus, he starts to think. He goes to an ecclesiastical school. Those young men dedicated to Christ. He didn't find any face that called his attention. Visited cities and gave up looking for the face that could be used as a model. He was about to refuse the painting. The wall was already prepared. The first layer of plaster had been spread. All he had to do was to start. When he went about walking in the surroundings of Milan, he heard the sound of a flute, a recorder flute. I recalled Zamfir. Zamfir was one of the greatest flutists of the 20th century. Until today, he is an Hungarian genius who touched the humanity. So he follows that flute sound, light, in that morning air of spring, and sees a young shepherd blowing that recorder flute. He gets delighted, but when he gets closer to him, it was Jesus. That face, the Jewish nose, slightly long, the chin gracefully drawn, the hair parted in the middle in the curly Nazarene style. He was a lad. There was a special beauty about him. And then he asked, "What do you do?" "I am a shepherd." "How much do you earn?" "Nothing. I shepherd the sheep for my family." "And do you live off your parents?" "Yes. Here in Milan, we depend on the traditions. And what if I invited you to pose in my atelier? I will pay you a good wage. It's up to my father." So Da Vinci went to his father and hired the young man. He gave him a velvet bag with many golden coins. Then the boy went to his studio and posed for him. That face that is in the Last Supper. And he made a fortune. But La Gracia convent had another blank wall and wished to have it painted another mural. The Milanese love this mural so much that it's considered one of the 7 greatest masterpieces in the world, including Mona Lisa, which in the Second World War, the Milanese took bags of sand and put on both sides of the wall to protect it from the threat of some air strike. And the church was bombed, but the wall remained intact. So what we see today is what Da Vinci did. Observation, here Givaldo made a small slip. That church of our Holy Mary's blessing longed for Judas's kiss and hired Da Vinci, same slip. Da Vinci, same slip, accepted the challenge. He already had Jesus' face, which was the most important. But how would Judas's face be like? Perhaps we should ask ourselves how the face of the friend that betrays his friend would be like. Whatever reason it may be suggested. If he wanted to speed up the revolution, if it was treason, it doesn't matter. The fact is he sold him. And it was to the priest. He sold him for 30 gold coins. How would this man's face be? There had to be some conflict. Nobody commits an act like this and numbs the consciousness. How would he live with the others? So what did he do? He went to Milan's prison, the worst criminals. The face was ugly and deformed, but it was not what Da Vinci expected. In the end, he gave up looking for Judas's face. And one day, visiting the prison, but without any expectation, he walked past one of the small cells of the prison, and through a tiny window, he could see somebody turned to the bigger window. But his back was bent, and it exuded something strange, nauseating, hateful, that he stopped. It was the first time a criminal provoked him such an impact, let alone with his back turned to him. He stopped and asked the director to come in. He said, "Look, he is one of the most dangerous person that has ever been to Milan's prison." He said, "But I want to see this man." So he got inside. The man was cuffed and shackled to the wall. The monstrous countenance, hard, severe. Then he said, "I met my Judah," and asked the director if he could hire him according to the laws. He would pay the man an amount for him to pose and enjoy the results later. The director agreed. The contract was signed, and the next days, Leonardo spent some time in the prison. The first day, that monstrous being was at ease with his expressions of hatred on his face, looking out through the barred window. On the fourth day, he had a kind of convulsion that looked like an epileptic fit, and Leonardo could see his face at that moment and the contrast with his state of lucidity. On the 10th day, Leonardo said, "Let's stop. I cannot paint you, because that monster is not inside you anymore. This face is not the same I found when I first saw you. Your countenance changes all the time, and I can't. I just cannot paint that." Then the criminal raised his head, and Leonardo realized that he was crying. "What's the matter? You killed 2 prostitutes. You destroyed the lives of some of their lovers. You stole, robbed, and committed the most heinous crimes. Why are you crying now?" He said, "Don't you recognize me?" "No, how could I know such a monster?" "I am your Jesus." That Jesus who had never tried the libido, who had never got drunk, who lived by playing the flute and the herd of sheep, who was naive, that Jesus with a look of hope, who wanted to marry a villager with the money you gave me. You destroyed me because I didn't know how to spend it. I fell in the hands of crooks who took me to the worst prostitution dens, and I debauched myself. I fell madly in love with the illusions and drugs of that time. I lost myself along the way, and the first woman I loved was committed to the brothel, and to have her, I killed her lover. Later, I killed her. And since then, it happened again and again. Now that I am thinking about my face that you painted, I give up. Don't paint me again. Look for another face. And the canvas, the mural, stayed only with half Judas's face. That hateful man, with half the face, smooth and sweet of the look of Jesus, of the youngster who played the flute graciously. And we can see in the room, if we stay in the middle, Jesus, and looking the bitterness of the countenance. What do I mean with that? It's that all of us are subject to climbing the highest we can, the mountain of the life, but also to fall down the deepest abyss. Any of us. It depends on the circumstances. Let's be then very careful with our values. To have is very different than to be. The old question of philosophy, to have or to be. To have, we have health. Well, we think we have. Maybe I have here one of those most severe cancers. But as it hasn't affected me yet, hasn't reached my delicate net of nerves, I don't feel anything. And somebody can be deformed by cancer. and still be an angel of God on earth and teaching the creatures to love. Chico Xavier was blind of one eye, which he took care for 60 years without complaining. And one day with Arigó, whose film about his life will be in the movies next month, Dr. Fritz, incorporated in Arigó, said, "I can operate your eye now and you'll be cured." And Chico said, "No, thank you. I don't want that. This eye is a karmic debt. I misused my eyesight, and I was born with it to purify myself. If you cure me, I will keep this debt, and it will show in another disease. As I grew used to my blindness and my pain, I preferred to keep it as it is." And he died with his blind eye. And I saw there in Congonhas, in the countryside, when I visited him on the 5th of January 1961, he assisted a person who had an ingrown toenail and went there for Arigó to take it off. And so he did. He did all good he could. He assisted over 2 million people, one by one, and disincarnated victim of a car accident when he was driving in high speed. The car hit a tree, and he got back to life. So we are the authors of our own lives. I wish to leave a message. So, let's all sow. Of course, I also wish to sow. But sure that even though the seed falls onto an ungrateful soil among stones, if one of them germinates, it will give us back much more than the ones we threw at the soil. Therefore, let's do good, a good word, a handshake. We can only have the real picture when we are in need. And as I have needed and still need friends, with prayers, gentle people who help me carry my own cross. So I leave this message. Let's be faithful until the end. Let's pray, asking God to bless us. Let's ask the mediums, carriers of healthy energy, so to ease our distress, our pain, and so we can leave this meeting with joy. The gospel is the anthem of happiness. The word gospel comes from Evangelion, which means good news. The gospel is good news. So we who receive this good news, let's live here happily. If we are not getting along well with whom we live with, leave the sadness behind and go back to the good. Let's say, "Dear Jesus, we beg you for ourselves. Bless me. Bless us. Bless our home, which is a sanctuary we dedicate to you, for our directors, the administration of Mário Sérgio. Bless, dear Lord, because we love you and wish to serve you with honor and honesty. Bless those who we love, our relatives, our dear ones, the kind hearts. Bless also those who hate us. Yes, there are on earth sick and embittered people who unfortunately still hate. We ask for them, but also ask for those who could not stand the afflictions and committed suicide. We ask for the suicide victims
para que a tua misericórdia
so your mercy can reach them.
pedimos
And we also
por aqueles que fazem o
ask
bem
for those who do good
e não se deixem
so they don't let
dominar
themselves
pelas sombras
be dominated
da
by the
ignorância.
shadows of ignorance.
Abençoa
Bless our work,
nosso trabalho,
our social
nossa vida
and humane life.
social e humana. A água
The
que te
water
expomos,
that we show you,
modifica-lhe a
modify
estrutura
its
como em Caminho.
structure as you did in Canaan.
Oh, Jesus,
O Lord,
abençoa
bless
a nossa paz
our
interior.
inner peace.
Que esses fluidos
May these fluids
desse momento especial
in this special moment
deem-nos
give us
a alegria de
joy
viver
to live
em paz.
and peace.
Agradecemos
We thank you
esta hora de
for
reflexão.
this hour of
E
reflection
pedimos-te
and ask you
que nos acompanhes
to follow us to our
aos
homes.
nossos lares. Está encerrada
And this
a nossa
is the
reunião
end of our
com
meeting.
votos de paz.
We wish you peace
Deus
to
nos
you
abençoe.
all. God bless us.